Hey, Sean here. I hope you're all doing great. If you haven't, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's just get straight into it. So what is Dead by Daylight? It's a 4v1 multiplayer horror game which pits 4 unlucky survivors against 1 killer. Survivors will be forced to fight for their lives using stealth and perks, while repairing 5 generators in order to escape through a gate or hatch. On the other side of this is the killer, who prowls the map, taking advantage of any clue they can to track down and hook their prey. It's honestly thrilling and scary, but at this point in time the game is 5 years old. It's gone through some changes, but mostly through the introduction of new survivors, killers and new maps. But is it really worth playing this late in life? After a few years, there is a massive roster. There's original characters and licensed characters. It's honestly impressive how Behaviour Interactive has managed to get characters from so many horror franchises into one game. We have iconic killers such as Freddy Krueger, Leatherface, Ghostface, Michael Myers, and more recently Nemesis as part of the Resident Evil chapter. It's a horror fan's dream to see these killers on the same roster as one another, and I'm sure there'll be even more eventually. In the survivor camp, we see iconic characters such as Leon and Jill from Resident Evil, Ash Williams from Evil Dead, and Laurie Strode from Halloween. Honestly, I'm excited to see who they get next. These last few weeks have been consumed by this game. I'm absolutely hooked now. Even though I did buy this at launch, I'd played very little of it, a few matches at most, and then I forgot about it. I never really got into it like a lot of others did, especially the Twitch streamers that you see playing this almost religiously. For the longest time, I was honestly surprised that a game like this could even last as long as it did, especially with something that seemed so basic in gameplay. I wrongly brushed it off, and it wasn't until I really started to experiment with different survivors that I saw that there were genuinely different playstyles that you could adopt. Now that the game is in its 5th year, finding a survivor that fits your style can be a little daunting at times. There's an impressive roster full of variety, so let's take a look at some of the survivors I'd recommend for new players. I'll be talking about their starter perks and what they do. So after playing and rotating survivors, I settled on Feng Min, a character that I now use pretty consistently. Feng Min can repair generators just like everyone else, but when Feng uses the technician perk and fails a skill check, it doesn't make a loud bang like it would with other characters. She was perfect for me while I got used to those skill checks. Feng's second perk is called Alert, which allows you to see where the killer is for 4 seconds after they perform the breaking action. The third perk, Lithe, gives you a speed boost when vaulting during chases. It's very useful and has helped me escape more than a few times to say the least. Kate Denson is the second character that I would recommend using as a new player. I find Kate to allow more aggressive plays, and she has some pretty useful perks, such as Boil Over, which increases your struggle effect with the killer. Very useful as a starter, as you might get captured more than others. Dance With Me stops scratches from appearing for 3 seconds when performing a fast vault or sprinting out of a locker. Scratch marks are one of the things that the killer will use to track you, so this is a very useful perk. Kate's final perk, Windows of Opportunity, allows you to see the aura of pallets, breakable walls and vaults within 20 meters. This is a very useful skill for escapes and kind of ties all of Kate's skills together, allowing her to play somewhat aggressively compared to Feng Min during matches. The 2 characters that I've mentioned here are parts of DLCs, the Spark of Madness for Feng Min and the Curtain Call for Kate Denson, so I'd understand if you'd prefer a character that's in the base game. If this is the case, then I would have to recommend Dwight, who is more than competent for new players. Dwight was the first character that I used when I started playing, and he's also one that I've seen quite a lot of people use, so that must count for something. Dwight's perks include Bond, which allows you to read other survivors' auras and see where they are within a certain distance. Very useful for keeping track of other players and in turn the killer if you see your teammates running away. Leader increases the speeds at which other survivors perform tasks when standing within a certain distance of them. This is a perk that will come in handy when another character is opening the gate at the end. Finally, Prove Thyself, which improves other people's repair speeds when standing within 4 meters of you, and gives a blood point bonus for cooperative actions. Another very useful skill that definitely will put pressure on the killer during matches. One survivor that I would recommend against using with their start perks as a new player would be David, who has a perk that makes the game very difficult. You begin the match in the injured state and cannot be healed past that, although he doesn't leave the blood trails like the other characters do when injured. Obviously, you don't have to use these perks, but there are perk related achievements that people might want to get. Without carrying on and listing every character in the game, my recommendation would be to check out all of the characters beforehand and see if any of these abilities speak to you. At this point, the roster is absolutely massive with plenty of characters to keep you occupied. In-game characters and killers are classified as easy, intermediate and hard, and from what I've played it seems pretty spot on, and is something that you might want to consider when picking a character. Over in the killer camp, I would recommend the Trapper and Wraith. Both are very good killers that are easy to get to grips with and will at least help you kill some survivors at a beginner level. Once I had leveled these two characters up to around level 10 to get the 3 character perks, I found myself competently killing most if not all of the survivors in a match. At level 15 you get to unlock a 4th perk slot which allows you even further flexibility. So, let's take a look at their perks. The Trapper has a nerving presence, which influences the frequency and difficulty of skill checks for survivors when in proximity to them. Newer survivors, or people who aren't fully paying attention, might struggle with this perk. The second perk, Brutal Strength, is very useful for breaking pallets, walls and generators, as it allows you to perform those actions faster. It's definitely a useful perk for when you're rotating generators to sabotage and in chase with survivors. The third and final perk, Agitation, allows you to transport bodies quicker to the hook, while also increasing your terror radius while doing so, terror radius being the survivor's way of sensing you at a distance. It's very useful to have while you get used to the movement of the survivors when they struggle as you transport them, something also very useful against perks that increase the struggle meter. Combine all of these perks with the traps that this killer can place down, and you have a very aggressive killer who has potential to cause issues around the map. I've seen the Trapper maneuvering people around certain areas, only to have the survivor fall into a bear trap. It's a great killer to start with. My next recommendation, the Wraith, is such a fun killer to use. They can turn invisible at the hit of a bell. Sneaking up to survivors is just so much fun. The Wraith has perks such as Predator, which makes the scratch marks from actions such as running and vaulting spawn closer together. This is very useful for tracking the survivors as it makes it more obvious as to where the survivor is running to. Bloodhound makes the blood more noticeable to you and allows it to be tracked for up to 4 seconds longer than normal. Again, a very useful perk to tracking survivors with, especially in use with the first perk. The Wraith's final perk, Shadowborn, increases your field of view, which is another very useful perk for when you're tracking, as it allows you to notice more of what is going on. The Wraith's perks are all very much focused on tracking survivors, which is great considering the Wraith can turn invisible. With a character like the Wraith, it's almost always best to keep moving around checking generators. You will almost certainly get the jump on your prey this way. Obviously, perks are dependent on whether you choose to use them. You can use non-character specific perks. They all slightly alter your methods of playing. It's also worth noting that the character specific perks unlock as teachable perks for other characters at level 30, 35 and 40 to find on other blood webs. For example, when I'm using Wraith, I now use a perk called Corrupt Intervention, which is a perk from the Plague. It blocks off 3 generators at the start of the match for up to 2 minutes. I also use Barbecue and Chili, the Cannibal perk, which allows me to see players beyond a certain radius for a few seconds after hooking a survivor. You also get bonus blood points. Coming up with the perfect loadout that works for you is half the fun in this game. I really enjoyed my time as the killer. The game feels completely different to the way it does as a survivor. It completely cuts out that fear and tension I feel, allowing me to play aggressively, not wanting to hide, and to viciously catch the survivors in surprise. What I will say though is that my playstyle as a killer was definitely influenced by my time as a survivor. I recommend new players start as a survivor for games to see patterns and to get used to how the killer plays during games. I noticed quite a lot of killers almost refusing to move away from hooks once a survivor was caught, or being almost dead set on hooking a certain survivor. This was almost always to their detriment and would usually result in most of the survivors escaping, with the exception of the person on the camped hook. While I learned from this, I did find this quite annoying at times, especially if I were the one hooked. It would waste most of my time in the game, as my teammates couldn't rescue me due to the killer standing next to me. Sometimes survivors do come to unhook you, but it often ends in death for one of us, if not both. Honestly, nobody loves spending 5 minutes looking for a game and loading in to only be hooked and camped for another 5 minutes. I'd see a lot of disconnects in this game because of this, and it's a shame. That said, please don't be one of those. It's not fun for the survivors, and it's probably not that fun for the killer either. You'll very rarely manage to kill everyone being like that. Overall though, as a survivor, I'd say my time spent there has definitely taught me how important it is to be a team player in this game. One person cannot do all 5 generators on their own, and if someone is hooked and someone is doing a generator, it might just be up to you to get that person off the hook. Inactivity or reluctance in this game can put you and your 3 other teammates in a very bad position. My best games so far have been ones that everyone has attempted to do generators and help teammates. The longer you take to complete objectives, the harder it becomes. Once a killer figures out your style and movements, it becomes incredibly difficult to win against that. I'd sometimes see people hiding far away across the map from killers instead of doing generators or unhooking teammates. I've even seen some survivors lure the killer to other teammates that are repairing generators on purpose so that they can escape. Fortunately, this has become less of an issue as my survivor rank improved. When I did lose games though, I very rarely felt cheated by a killer having an unfair advantage. It almost always felt that it was because of skill or lack of teamwork, never because of pure balancing. Behaviour has done well with managing the balancing of a huge roster. In terms of progression for survivors and killers, all characters use blood points. This currency allows you to level up your character on the blood web through purchase of items, perks and offerings. At level 50, you're allowed to prestige, starting again, but also unlocking cosmetics. You can continue to put points in past that if you don't want to lose progress. Obviously I've covered perks, so all I'll say is to look in the shrine menu for teachable perks. You get some great perks to use on characters on a weekly basis in exchange for iridescent shards. The items that you can obtain include ones such as the toolbox, which offers a progress speed increase and allows you to tamper with hooks. There's the medipacks, ideal for self-healing, a torch which can stun the killer, and a map which highlights generators and escape hatches when in a certain range. There are more, but all are pretty useful in their own ways. Obviously the killer isn't going to be using any of those items, but they do have items that influence their own abilities. While offerings are essentially modifiers, there are a lot to choose from. You can get ones that influence the upcoming map, offerings that increase the amount of blood points you receive at the end. While survivors and killers share a lot of the same offerings, they do have exclusives too. After a match has ended, I did feel though that a lot of the time the amount of blood points received at the end of the match is pretty low, especially when you consider how many characters there are and the fact that you can prestige 3 times. It would take me around 150,000 blood points to level to around 10. I'd frequently get around 15 to 20,000 per match, so you can only imagine how long that would take to get a character to 50 3 times. It would take a large amount of time, and considering chapters are released frequently, I don't think I'll be bothering with all of that except for the characters that I main. I definitely think the economy is a bit broken, but overall though, I'd say my experience so far has been a pretty positive one, and I'm looking forward to playing some more of this game. So far I've found the player base to be pretty nice. I've seen the occasional toxic player, and the issues with how certain people can play I've mentioned earlier have been more the exception and definitely not the rule. So, would I recommend this game to new players? Definitely. Those who might be considering picking up the game but maybe feel a bit put off because of its age or how many DLCs it has shouldn't really feel discouraged. If anything, this game is just as accessible now as it was when it first released. The new additions don't change the core gameplay really, rather they offer new styles and ways to play. Even if you were to just buy the base game, you'd be able to play at more than a competent level against players who own every DLC. The player base is still absolutely huge too, with no signs of shrinking, so there's no issues finding games. Obviously as a killer it does take a little longer as you're solo queuing, but it's not that bad. Plus, you do get rewarded for playing killer. I'm sure I could talk some more about my impressions, but I think that's enough for today. I'm off to play some more Survivor, and I hope to see you in game sometimes. Please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think about this game. Are you new to it, or are you a veteran? Do you have any great tips for new players? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you all very soon. Take care.